The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday, August 20th. I hope everybody is having a fantastic week so far. And we continue our adventure in Barcelona. Anyway, we should probably jump into the news. No stories special right now. Let me just looking here to see what's going on in the chat. All right. Roger's here from Seoul, South Korea. All right. Hey, Roger, you should come to the conference in Australia in December, and you should see if there are any South Korean young people, students of objectivism, who might want to come to Australia and might want to apply for a scholarship. A scholarship can cover travel expenses. So please consider that. Letting people know in South Korea, to the extent that you have contacts that might be interested in coming, that it is happening. All right, let's jump in. We are day 2 of the Democratic National Convention, the convention that will launch, I guess, phase 2 of the Kamala Harris campaign for president. Last night we had a whole array of big-time speakers. Of course, the crescendo was Joe Biden's speech. I think it was, by the time he spoke, this is how good they are with scheduling, it was already 11 p.m. East Coast time. I think he ended close to midnight or after midnight. They literally had to bump James Taylor, who was going to be singing You've Got a Friend or something like that. I used to like James Taylor. I still like James Taylor. Anyway, he was going to be singing at the convention. Bad time management and everything. They had to bump him, and so I'm sure he's crushed. He didn't get to sing in front of the convention. But Joe Biden did give a 50-minute speech. He was mostly coherent. He was mostly like his State of the Union address earlier this year, where he was kind of firing and aggressive and really emphasizing his so-called achievements during his presidency. But he did fade towards the end, and there were some significant stumbles where he lost his place on the teleprompter and kind of was rolling his eyes and mumbling. You know the drill now with Joe Biden when he loses it. They must get him on some kind of drugs just before he has to make some of these more energetic speeches. And for some reason, those drugs failed, or they forgot to give them to him, or they gave him the wrong dose before the debate. Anyway, Biden gave the speech. He endorsed Kamala. Best decision he's ever made in his life was to choose her as his vice president, and he's completely behind her and everything else. Kamala came out unexpectedly, a surprise at the convention, to get some photo ops with Joe Biden and to thank him and all of that. So that was definitely a highlight of the last night's convention. I doubt, so that was Biden, and I think Biden at this point is very much concerned about his legacy, very much concerned about protecting his legacy. All his achievements, all his bipartisan bills, shame on Republicans for signing on to those, and what he views as his economic achievements is the strong economy that he is providing. He's old, but he's also obviously got some dementia. I know people in the 80s who are completely sharp, but he's got dementia. Maybe we can blame his psychology and philosophy on that, but more likely it's just whatever. It's just a disease, right? Anyway, so he basically has handed it off. Also, yesterday, Hillary Clinton was on stage raving about Kamala, talking about the fact that Kamala Harris will be the first one to break the ultimate glass ceiling, which is the presidency of the United States, which Clinton was hoping to do 8 years ago and failed miserably when Donald Trump actually won. So Hillary was there to endorse Kamala. There was a segment of a speech which was quite, entertaining, I guess you could say, when she started discussing, attacking Donald Trump and discussing Donald Trump's legal woes. A few attendees began chanting, "Lock him up." And the chant, of course, suddenly took over the arena, and the entire arena were going, "Lock him up." And while Harris, in her campaign and the rallies, usually shuts that down, is not interested in going there, is not interested in emphasizing this, Clinton kind of smiled and was enjoying it. If you remember 2016, Trump rallies often included these mass chants of "Lock her up, lock her up." So this was a little bit of a getting back at Trump on behalf of Hillary Clinton. I'm sure she enjoyed it. I'm sure she had a good time. To really get a sense of where the Democratic Party is today, I think the most interesting speaker last night was actually AOC. AOC spoke, and I think of all the speakers, from what I saw, she got the most rousing applause. She was the most enthusiastically received. Now, there is no question, and I know some of you will disagree with this, but there is no question that she is incredibly charismatic. You might hate her ideas as I do. You might think she is the devil incarnate when it comes to her leftist ideas, but she knows how to play a crowd. She knows what to tell them. She knows how to say it. She knows how to get them excited. She has a real natural charisma. I've said this for years now. I was attacked for it. I was ridiculed for it, but I've said AOC will become a significant part of the Democratic Party. She will be in a leadership position soon. She might one day run for president, and she might be the Democratic nominee. She is much more charismatic than a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren or even a Kamala Harris. She's much more articulate. She's much more passionate, and she's smarter than them. As much as you guys think she's dumb, she is not dumb, right? She is not dumb. She complimented Kamala, and and of course she was doing this while there were protests outside. We'll get to the protests in a second. But she managed to use that to compliment Kamala, as Kamala tirelessly fighting for a ceasefire deal that would release the hostages, as if Kamala had any involvement in any of that. But I think that and this is definitely the case, that the passion, the fire, the motivation, the excitement within the Democratic Party, in the progressive far left, it's in AOC territory. Even though the squad is 2 members short, because 2 of the members have been beaten in primaries. Ilhan Omar did win her primary, so she is still part of the squad, will be still part of Congress, unless a Republican beats her, which is very unlikely. The squad will be down to 6 members from 8, but that part of the party, that progressive left part of the party, is where the action is and where the passion is, and while its positions on Israel and its positions on some issues in foreign policy outside the mainstream of the Democratic of Democratic voters, I think. Their positions in economics, their position on the economy, their positions on social issues are the positions that will dominate the party. And we already see that with Kamala Harris, basically, what we talked about yesterday, her position on positions on corporate greed and greedflation, her position on housing, other positions are basically all coming out of the Elizabeth Warren AOC playbook. And AOC is where the action is. AOC is where the passion is. AOC is where the ideas are, if you want to call them ideas. They are the ones that will keep pushing the Democratic Party further to the left. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be amazing if we actually had an opposition party to the ever left moving Democratic Party? Instead, we have a nutty Republican Party that is way left on economic issues and way crazy right on many of the social issues. So we have two, in my view, unvotable political parties that are just going and getting worse in significant, dramatic fashion. Just to give you one other illustration of this, Tom Walz, who is the vice presidential candidate, of course, and he is the governor of Minnesota. I mean, Tim Walz is a far left progressive. He might not govern that way. He might be more of a pragmatist when he governs. He might be more of a moderate when he governs. Although, remember how he treated BLM when they rioted in Minneapolis. But Tim Walz was an apologist for Chinese communism in the early 1990s. In a local Nebraska paper in 1991, Tim Walz wrote that the Chinese communist system is one in which everyone is the same and everyone shares. He actually went on his honeymoon. This is in 1991, or earlier in 1980s, I guess. He went on his honeymoon to China. So, we're talking about, oops, what is going on here? We're talking about the vice presidential nominee here who is friendly to, was in his youth, and I'm not suggesting he believes this today, but at least in his youth flirted with communism and flirted with Chinese-style communism, Mao Zedong-style communism. I mean, they only killed, 30, 40, 50 million people, and only starved millions, killed millions in the Cultural Revolution. I mean, these people are committed collectivists. They're committed statists. They're committed to economic socialism of one form or another. They're committed redistributionists. And this is the Democratic Party, and these are the voices that are becoming stronger in the Democratic Party. Again, what an opportunity missed by Kamala Harris to go with somebody like Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who's still pretty left, right? Who is not exactly a capitalist, but at least is not affiliated with the furthest, with the furthest leftist agenda items, and with economic policies that come straight out of kind of the social democratic playbook in Europe. In that sense, again, we've got a political party. We've got two political parties moving in directions that make neither of them electable. And there is a real space for a new political party. There really is a space for somebody with kind of American ideas. They don't have to be as radical as I am. They don't have to be, laissez-faire capitalists. But there is a space there for kind of an old-style conservative defense of some capitalism, and of course, the reason all of that disappeared was unprincipled. But there is a space for somebody saying, now whether the American people want that or not is a question. I don't know. I don't know. If somebody ran, Mitt Romney these days sounds sane. I had a hard time voting for him. I did, but I had a hard time voting for him in 2012. But as compared to what we have available, he seems amazing. Right? He's far from being a capitalist, but at least he's not a wacko. At least he's not a nutcase. So anyway, the convention will continue. We'll hear from everybody in the Democratic side, and I don't think we'll hear anything particularly interesting, anything particularly new, but this is where we are. In the meantime, outside the actual convention itself, there are protests. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, the protests are significantly smaller than what was expected. While protesters did manage to break through barriers yesterday and approach the convention center, the police got it under control pretty quickly, pushed them back, reset the barriers, brought in more police. I think because the president was there, there was more some police, Capitol forces from Washington, D.C. also there. And generally, they held back the protesters. The protesters. At some point, there was an expectation of 30,000 protesters. The organizers claimed there were 20,000 there. Almost every network out there, including the pretty solidly left-leaning networks, all said, single-digit thousands. So less than 10,000 protesters. The protesters were nasty and mean and pro-Hamas and about as ugly and horrible as they can be, but a lot smaller, a lot less violent, a lot less intrusive than I think again people were expecting, and that people thought would manifest. All right, let me just see something here. So far, internet is good. Interesting. Okay. Jonathan Chait, who is, of course, a left-of-center columnist, professor, said of the protesters outside the DNC, he said, quote, "When they say they believe they are part of the Palestinian liberation movement, and that the movement is entitled to use any means necessary, that is exactly what they mean. This," he adds, "is blood and soil nationalism for the left." What's interesting, though, and I've made this point in the past, and I made it yesterday as well, is these people are protesting about something that really has no impact on their lives. This is so different and so much more corrupt than the 1960s anti-war demonstrations where there was something at stake. America had boots on the ground. A lot of the people protesting were afraid of a draft that would enlist them and send them to die in a war that they didn't understand and didn't believe in, a war that the United States was engaged in. And yes, many of them were communist sympathizers with the North Vietnamese, but there was a selfish motivation behind a lot of it, and that is they didn't want to go fight a war. You could even say, they didn't want to die. And the political class had clearly not made the case for why America was fighting this war. In supporting the Hamas or the Palestinian liberation movement, this is not a conflict that affects them directly. There's nothing for them at stake here. It's not like anybody is calling for a draft in the United States, and it's not like there's any possibility they're going to be drafted and sent overseas to fight. We're talking about a war between two people, and I think one can have very strong ideas about who is in the right and who is in the wrong. and obviously the people supporting the Palestinian liberation movement are completely wrong. But what is the motivation for the level of passion that they have? What is it that is so important about this conflict that so defines them? This isn't a classic Marxist struggle. These aren't workers rising up against capitalist oppressors. So it can't be understood in terms of Marxism. It's not American imperialism. It's not American blood being spilt over there. You could argue it's some American treasure. The United States does support Israel financially, but as compared to other things that the United States spends money on, this is a trivial amount. What is it that gets them so animated, so motivated, so hateful? I mean, you see these people out there, they're vile, but they're full of passion and energy, and they really, they present as if they believe in some higher cause. So what is it? And this is purely what they've been studying in school. This is identity. Now, some of them are Palestinians, some of them are Arabs from that part of the world. They hold strong views for a variety of personal reasons, but many of them are regular Americans who went to college and studied, and what this really is an example of is the seriousness and the passion with which they take the identity politics that they learned in school. This is a testament to the success of their leftist professors who have succeeded in completely indoctrinating a whole generation of students, or several generations now of students, in an ideology in such a way that they're not just intellectually engaged with these ideas of intersectionality, post-colonialism, but generally identitarianism. But they're not just intellectually engaged with these, but they have emotionally passionate, as passionate as those kids who were afraid of being drafted and going to die in Vietnam. Now that I can see getting passionate about. Here they're passionate about people far away on the other side of the planet. Yes, they're horrified by these images of children and women dying, but there are women and children dying in Somalia, there are women and children dying in Sudan, where there are civil wars and where the horrors and the massacres are horrific. Nobody cares. But here's a clear in their mind, right? A clear example of everything their professors taught them. An oppressor and an oppressed. Successful people and unsuccessful people. A successful tribe and identity, call it Jew, and an unsuccessful tribe and identity, call it Palestinian. And it's easy to categorize. And the one is successful, the other is unsuccessful, and the only explanation possible for that, the only explanation presented to them by their professors, the only explanation consistent with the worldview that their professors have taught them, is that one has oppressed the other, one has committed massive crimes against the other, one is fundamentally colonial and oppressing the natives, the poor, innocent natives. And the only reason the natives are unsuccessful has nothing to do with their own culture, because success has nothing to do with culture. Success has everything to do with your genes. The only reason they're unsuccessful is because they're being oppressed by the oppressor, by the Jew who is oppressing them. And everything they see is through that kind of prism. Everything they see is through this prism of identitarianism. And this is one of the most evil ideologies anybody has ever come up with. It basically demonizes anybody successful. It makes them the successful person. It makes the successful person, always the devil. And it makes lack of success. It makes failure in whatever dimension one wants to count it as never the responsibility of those who fail. It is always the responsibility of those who succeed. And this is all done in the name of egalitarianism. It is all done in the name of equality of outcome. And of course, as Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge have taught us, the only way to achieve that kind of equality of outcome, the only way to achieve basically the equality between the so-called oppressor and the so-called oppressed is by basically killing those who are deemed to be oppressors, killing those who are more successful, killing those who have more ability, killing those who have made something of their lives. And I don't think this is how Hamas thinks of it. It has a completely different story about the whole thing. But this is how these American kids think of it. So the idea that Iran is going to, and Hezbollah are going to launch this massive attack on Israel and kill hundreds of thousands or millions of Jews, they're happy about this because that is the only way, they believe, to achieve this utopian goal of equality of outcome. It's the only way to deal with oppressors. It's the only way to correct the so-called injustices of the past. And this is why they completely embrace violence, they completely embrace terrorism, they completely embrace genocide. And they are the genocidal ones. So, and they need to be called out for Hamas is the genocidal. It's not, there's no genocide going on in Gaza, but there was genocide on October 6th, and there would be even much greater genocide if Hamas was allowed to win or to survive or to sustain itself or to accomplish even some of its goals. Anyway, so while the Democratic Party is trying to ignore those voices, they're trying to ignore the protests, they're trying to pretend that they don't take that too seriously, and they're dedicated both to defending Israel and to releasing hostages and to it's a big part of the Democratic Party. It cannot be evaded. And let me just make a prediction here that at least in some universities, you will see the school year starting. Next week, in the next few weeks, the school year is starting. And you will see in some universities, you will see major disruptions, major challenges around these protests. The protests are going to continue. There are going to be more protests on campuses. The harassment of students is going to continue. These people are passionate. They have, again, I blame 100% here. They're professors, they're teachers. And they've learned that there are no consequences. Of the 22 students in Columbia, right, who were arrested for occupying a Columbia building, Hamilton Hall, of those 22 students, 18 remain in good standing with the university. Now, in the past, the university had stated that they would expel everybody who participated in a mob who stormed the building. They haven't expelled, as far as we know, anybody. We know that 18 of the 22 are still in good standing, and they're going to show up to campus whenever Columbia opens. I don't know if it's in August or September. They're going to show up on campus, and they've learned nothing. So it all starts over again. I think another university opened in maybe Baruch College in Manhattan, I think opened up yesterday, the new semester, and there were already demonstrations there. These are students, again, who are taking what their professors taught them seriously. No consequences, zero. By the way, the president of Columbia finally resigned. It's not clear if she was pushed out, exactly how that all evolved, but she resigned. And not clear who's going to be the permanent replacement and whether their policy is going to be any different. But clearly, there's a massive battle going on within the Columbia administration and among the faculty. Clearly, the faculty of Columbia are, in the humanities at least, almost all, on the side of the students, on the side of demonstrations, on the side of Hamas. Their ideology demands it. And, you know, we are seeing in these demonstrations, we are seeing in this movement the manifestation of 30, 40, 50 years of leftist takeover. I mean, again, the left always controlled the universities, but I'd say the far left, the new left, what Ayn Rand called the new left in the 1960s, in those days they were the students objecting to their professors' old left attitude, Marxist old left attitude. Now they are the professors, and they dominate the universities. They're everywhere. They're throughout the universities, and the students are the product of those professors. Now, luckily, the way life works in America, these students will leave university and they'll go find a job and they'll have a family and they'll lose their radical leftist political agenda, or they'll fail at work. Nothing attaches you more to reality than the need to perform. And they'll abandon these crazy ideas, or most of them will. But they have scarred the American soul. They have scarred the American political landscape forever. So it's going to be very difficult to overcome it. But that is the fringe of, a big fringe of the Democratic Party, and a fringe that the Democrats would like to pretend is not there for now. On the other hand, they're going to need all those kids and all the Arabs in Michigan to come out and vote if Kamala is going to win. So she is going to find ways and subtle ways to cultivate them in order to win. Just saw this story that's related to the election. I'll just pass it on. There's not much to say, but federal judge Michael Luttig, who pretty famous judge, a conservative judge, he's retired now. Has been a conservative legal scholar for many years, very prominent. He served in 2 Republican administrations. He's announced that he is voting for Kamala Harris. What he says is, quote, "In voting for Vice President Harris, I assume that her public policy views are vastly different from my own. But I am indifferent to this election as to her policy views on any issues other than America's democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law." So basically, I think like many people, he is making the case that while he disagrees with almost every policy issue Kamala Harris represents, the threat that Donald Trump poses to American democracy here understood as constitutional democracy, constitutional republic, to the Constitution and to the rule of law, that the threat that Donald Trump presents to that is so grave that he is willing to overcome the public policy issues, the disagreements, and vote for her in spite of that. So again, a vote against Donald Trump and against what happened January 6th, and against his election denialism, and against his nonchalant attitude towards the Constitution, and against Donald Trump's complete disregard for the rule of law. Those are the primary issues. Those are the most important issues to Judge Michael Luttig, again, a prominent conservative legal scholar, and as a consequence, he's voting for Kamala Harris. I think there are quite a few people like that, and this is what makes Donald Trump pretty much the only Republican who might, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but who might actually lose to Kamala Harris. I think pretty much any other Republican, certainly, I think even DeSantis, but certainly, what's her name? Nikki Haley would crush Kamala Harris. Because on the actual issues, this is why I've always said the left is not that big of a threat in the sense that on the issues, Americans don't support Kamala Harris. Now, on some of the stuff they do, on the economic populism, maybe I give too much credit to Americans, because I think they actually love the anti-corporate stuff that she and so many Democrats advocate for. All right, so that's what I have to say about the elections. I don't think I have anything more to say today about them. I'm sure there'll be a lot more that we can talk about in the days and weeks and months to come before November. But that is where I think, that's what I have right now. And again, you have to choose whether Kamala's horrible economic policy, horrible stance probably on Israel and potentially other foreign policy issues, how that weighs versus Donald Trump's bad economics, but Donald Trump's some good policies like deregulation and stuff like that, versus his disrespect for the Constitution, his disrespect for the rule of law, and his disrespect for the very fundamentals, the basics of the American system of government. And that's what you have to weigh in this election. That's what you have to weigh. And it's the worst choice I think we've ever had in an election. It worse than Biden-Trump, because I think Biden in 2020 was better than Kamala in 2024, in a sense that he was more of a known quantity, he was more of a centrist. Kamala and her pick of Walz as vice president suggests is far more to the left of Biden, and in that sense worse than Biden. So things are politically getting nutty in America. They're getting crazy. And a lot of Americans on the right have decided that they want to leave the country, that they're giving up, that it's just insane. And we'll go through some of the reasons why they think that. But, some of these people have basically looked around and at the different options that are available out there in the world in terms of where they could possibly live. And, they've looked probably at South America, and they've looked at certain European countries, but all the things they hate about America, or the direction America's heading, are all even more manifest in Europe than they are in America, so they're certainly not going to go to Europe. I know some people on the right like this who kind of would love to go to Japan, but it's so impractical to go to Japan. It's impractical because the Japanese make it very difficult to emigrate to Japan, and it's impractical because the culture is just so different. And the culture is very different, and the language is different, and it's just very difficult. It's very difficult. So there is a growing movement on the right, and we're talking about thousands. We're not talking about dozens, we're talking about thousands of people moving to, I wonder if you could guess, where would you move? I mean, if you were really upset about the left in the United States, if you were, if you have traditional family values and you think that the left is destroying America and that Trump is just incompetent and the right is just incompetent in the U.S. and the U.S. is beyond saving from a traditionalist's point of view, where would you go? Did I tell you? Yeah, I told you in the title to the show. They're moving to Russia. They're moving to Russia. This has been a real trend over the last probably since 2018, 2019, from before COVID, accelerated over the last couple of years, even after the Russian invasion of Ukraine has really accelerated. They are moving to Putin's Russia. They admire Putin. They admire kind of what he stands for. They are taking their families often, a lot of them in their 40s and 50s. They have families. Some of them are single, some of them in their 60s. And they're uprooting their whole lives and moving over there. Republicans generally, people on the right generally in America, are more pessimistic about America's future than Democrats. 41% of likely U.S. voters believe there's a chance the U.S. will experience a second civil war sometime in the next 5 years. And as a consequence, they think America is going to a logical end. It's eating itself. And it's declining as a civilization. And that if you're Christian, if you're religious, if you believe in traditional family values, the West has nothing to offer you anymore. And the place to go is Russia, where they don't like gays. They certainly will not allow for any transgender stuff. Where a man's a man and a woman is a woman, and a man leads a family and the woman does what she's told. Many of the men moving to Russia are doing so after marrying Russian women. And this is a real thing. And partially in recognition of that, Putin yesterday signed a decree allowing foreign citizens to apply for temporary residence in Russia if, this is perfect. So this is Putin signed a decree allowing foreign citizens to apply for temporary residency in Russia if they share, quote, traditional Russian spiritual and moral values and oppose the destructive neoliberal ideological agenda in their home country. So basically, Putin wants all the right-wing nuts to come, many of them religious right-wing nuts, to come to Russia. And I'm with him. They should all go. They should all go. Make America much better. So if you share traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, and we can talk about what those are, and you oppose the destructive neoliberal ideological agenda in your home country like America, and of course, I don't know what neoliberal means, and neither does Putin, and neither does anybody else. It's just a phrase, a package deal they've created to define everything they don't like about the West. Then Russia is the place for you. And the Free Press has an article out called "The American Men Seeking the American Dream in Russia." And it's shocking and revealing of what is going on the right and what they care about. So no mention of economic freedom disappearing in America. The whole obsession is with the cultural left. Everything that upsets them, about the left, is, the cultural issues. Nothing about economic freedom, economic liberty, personal liberty. This is all about religion and guns and transgender and gays and stuff like that. Sex. That's what causes people to leave the United States these days and move their whole family to Russia. They completely get Putin. They think Putin is heroic and standing up to the left. The war in Ukraine is the West's fault. Putin is not to blame for it. He's just acting in defense, and he's being a man, and he's being masculine. And for them, the United States is a complete mess, and it's all about social issues. It's all about spiritual issues. It's all about religion, and it's all about sex. And I think, if you bring a little bit of money and American, you can also find a nice Russian woman who will probably agree to marry you and have babies with you. So I mean, here's the guy. This American who's moved from Atlanta to Yalta, which is in the Crimea. He lives in an 800 square foot apartment with a gorgeous view of the Black Sea, a 2-minute walk from the beach. There's a farmer market nearby. They have the best tomatoes and recently butchered pigs, he claims. And he can live comfortably on his Social Security, so it's very cheap to live there. And, quote, and 20% of the women could be supermodels, he said. Yeah, you know, he's 62 and looking for a 20-year-old something, I guess. So this is where Americans are going. This is where Americans are going. Pretty amazing. Now, this is not the first time disillusioned Westerners have gone to Russia in search of some kind of utopia. Philosophers like Bertrand Russell, Jean-Paul Sartre, the playwright George Bernard Shaw, Lee Harvey Oswald. Remember Lee Harvey Oswald? Or, for example, Steven Seagal. You remember Steven Seagal, the action B-list actor, action hero, born in Michigan? He's considers himself now 100% Russian. Vladimir Putin actually personally gave Seagal his Russian passport in 2016. So he was one of the early Russian Americans moving to Russia to find his utopia. Jean-Paul Sartre, he broke with the Soviet Union after its 1956 invasion of Hungary. I guess that's what caused him to realize the barbarity of the Soviet Union. I mean, God, you'd think these people were smart. Lee Harvey Oswald grew bored of life in provincial Minsk, where the KGB had sent him to work in a radio factory and had bigger plans for himself in the United States. So yeah, Seagal is 100% Russian. It's an interesting article. I encourage you to read it. It's on the Free Press, Barry Weiss's publication. You'll get a good sense of, I think, the angst and the insanity, the craziness on the American right today, kind of what upsets them, what triggers them, what is really motivating them, and what drives their hatred of the left. And if these are the alternative to the left, then of course we're in terrible shape, and we know we are in terrible shape. But these are not founding fathers-like figures concerned with morality of individualism. These are people concerned with their own collectivistic view of the world and their own kind of traditionalist, reactionary, traditionalist views that harken back to some mythical past that doesn't exist anymore. All right, let's see. Interesting piece in the Washington Post. Came out in the Washington Post, I think it was yesterday or today, where they really at length explain how DEI departments, again, one of the big projects of the left, one of the most important projects of the left over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the DEI departments and nonprofits who work in the diversity space, work for kind of this leftist agenda that is so destructive. This Washington Post article describes how the DEI departments, the nonprofits all over Silicon Valley are basically collapsing. That Silicon Valley, the industry sentiment has shifted. It's shifted against diversity. It's really shifted against race and sex-based discrimination, primarily after the Supreme Court ruling that said it's illegal. But I'm not sure they've completely shifted against diversity. But and what does diversity mean, and what kind of diversity? But the reality is the DEI departments are out in Silicon Valley, as are a lot of the nonprofits pushing this stuff. This core of kind of the far left ideology, what's at the heart of the far left ideology is crumbling in the place that it was most advocated for. You remember that Google engineer who wrote that piece about women in engineering? It was not a particularly good piece, but he got fired. It created a firestorm, and after that, it just became DEI became everywhere in Silicon Valley, and during COVID, this became the thing that Silicon Valley stood for and Silicon Valley companies stood for. And over the last year, maybe even more so over the last 6 months, that has completely collapsed and disappeared. The other thing that the Washington Post article notes, laments, if you will, is that in spite of the focus on DEI over the last 10 years or so, there's no more diversity today in Silicon Valley than there was back then. That is, DEI failed by its own standards. After the millions and millions and millions of dollars of funding, both from the nonprofit sector and within the corporate world, it's all gone. It's all gone. The money's gone and nothing changed. You don't have any more women programmers. You don't have any more minority programmers in Silicon Valley. In spite of all that effort, in spite of all that money, in spite of all that discrimination. So, yeah, what a waste. What a absolute waste. I mean, imagine all those millions of dollars. Imagine all those millions of dollars going into, I don't know, starting private schools and providing scholarships for poor kids to go to those private schools. I don't know, you remember Marva Collins, who had a small private school in the worst part of Chicago, and these were black kids from the worst neighborhoods in Chicago, and they all went to college afterwards, and they all did phenomenally well. Imagine taking all the money that's being devoted to DEI, that supposedly they care about black kids, and imagine investing all that money in starting Marva Collins-like schools in the inner cities of America, all over America. I mean, that would have such a dramatic effect in the lives of individual kids. That would have such a dramatic effect on the quality of their life, but also on these measures of diversity. There'd be a lot more black programmers, Hispanic programmers. See, if they really cared about that, that's what they would do. They would look what actually achieves that. Improved education. How do you improve education? Bring competition, bring private education into the inner cities. That's what'll do it. Instead, they spend it on this stuff. They corrupt the businesses that actually engage in this. They become corrupt. They hire the wrong people. They lose focus on what their target is. They lose focus on what they're supposed to really be doing. Now, to Silicon Valley's credit, to tech's credit, at the end of the day, Silicon Valley companies care about merit. They care about performance. They care about achievement. And they might pay off the DEI departments. They might hire a bunch of people, and they might create bureaucracies, and they might create a lot of horrible stuff, and they endorse and support terrible people and all that. But at the end of the day, if you don't perform, you're going to be fired. At the end of the day, if you're not do well in the interviews, they're not going to hire you. These companies care about achievement, care about success. That's the beauty of Silicon Valley. You can go after them, you can accuse them, you can attack them, you can do all that. But at the end of the day, these are companies that drive the US economy to the extent that we have an economy. It's a Silicon Valley economy. That is what drives American economic growth. And that is made possible by the fact that they're really focused on achievement. What's the difference is that's happened over the last 6 months is now that's much more explicit. And that's a huge positive move. And let me just make it clear, that's a huge positive move. There are positive things happening in the world. And Silicon Valley dropping DEI, Silicon Valley shifting away from social responsibility, so-called social responsibility, and moving back towards, we're here to make products, we're here to build, create values, we're here to make money. And what we care about is, what was that, instead of DEI, they're calling it merit, excellence, intelligence. MEI, merit, excellence, intelligence. That is phenomenal news, particularly for the younger people out there who hopefully will go work for these companies, who value merit, excellence. Is it MEI or MAI? Achievement, excellence, anyway, and intelligence. That's what all companies should value. All right, let's see. Yeah, we're going to talk about drones. All right, before we talk about drones, I want to talk about drones, autonomous vehicles in war generally, for a little bit. I want to remind everybody, because I see Super Chat is weak today, slow, don't know why exactly, but we're like $100 off of target for the first hour, and the first hour ends in 3 minutes. So it's going to take kind of a little miracle to get there. Or not a miracle, it's just going to take some of you guys to open up your wallets and get us to where we need to be. But I want to remind you that this is a show funded by listeners like yourself. Whether if you're watching live on YouTube, then you can provide value for value on YouTube through a super chat or through a sticker. Don't forget the stickers. You don't have to ask a question to support the show. And you can do a sticker for $1.99, $2.99, $5, whatever you think the show is worth to you, and based on your own wealth and what you can afford. But I do appreciate the support. I do appreciate having a relationship of values for values, of a trader relationship with you guys. So please manifest that in the chat and in the super chat and in the stickers. And of course, those of you who are not watching live, you can become monthly supporters on Patreon or on yaronbrookshow.com/membership. So please consider adding here in the last few minutes, like 2 minutes of the hour, so we get a little closer to the goal and we don't start the second hour in such a big, substantial hole. All right, so I was on a call today, a seminar, I guess you could call it, an hour-long seminar with, I can't really tell you who they were because of the rules of the game, but people with a lot of inside information about the Defense Department and about investments in autonomous weapons and the thinking in the different parts of the U.S. Defense infrastructure, from the services themselves, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army, and at the Defense Department kind of strategic level and the Pentagon strategic level. And it was a really interesting discussion because, first of all, there's no question that the world of defense has dramatically shifted, has changed. The whole idea of how to fight a war and how to be effective in fighting a war has really changed over the last 2 years, primarily with the war in Ukraine and Ukraine and the Russians both adopting new technologies, both adopting technologies on the fly very, very quickly, very, very fast, based on battleground conditions, but also based on what's available. So the use of drones has really changed the battlefield. The use of flying drones, obviously, has made tanks a lot more vulnerable. It has made intelligence a lot more instant and immediate, and the ability to fly very small drones, but pretty lengthy distances, very small drones who can provide intelligence back, or what they call suicide drones who can have enough explosives on them to create real damage on the other side. The ability to fly dozens, hundreds of drones, what are called drone swarms, all at once, and to overload any kind of air defense system has really changed the battlefield, changed how armies set themselves up. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians are constantly innovating, constantly changing tactics, constantly innovating in terms of the equipment. Both sides now have all kinds of GPS jamming systems and electronic jamming systems, and they're constantly trying to override the other party's systems and create drones that are less susceptible to the overriding technology. And this is an unbelievably dynamic and fast-paced space, which is, again, evolving very, very quickly and very, very dramatically. And I think people are thinking about war today in ways that are very different than they were thinking of it even just 3-4 years ago. That is, things have changed very quickly because of the Ukraine war, and I think what's going on with Israel is just reinforcing that, with drones coming in from Lebanon, and then the drone attack from the Iranians. Even when they were not successful, you can see the consequences. The use of drones by the Israelis in Gaza to kind of pinpoint assassinations, to pinpoint the killing or the destruction of particular forces. I mean, the sophistication is just phenomenal, and it really is amazing what is being achieved, and by all sides here, the good guys and the bad guys, in terms of use of these drones. Ukraine in particular has been successful, for example, with sea-based drones that act like boats, and that have been managed to basically make the Russian fleet in the Black Sea inoperable. The Russian fleet has basically gone back to ports in Russia. They don't even use the ports in Crimea anymore, because they're so vulnerable to attack by these suicide drones, not in the air but in the water, and Russia has lost significant assets, significant ships in the Black Sea over the last couple of years to this drone technology. Drone technology, by the way, that my brother worked on 20 years ago, and is now being deployed in significant ways and having a real dramatic impact on the war in Ukraine, ability to use the shipping lanes coming out of the Black Sea. So, this is a crucial and important and major technology. Let's see, where are we? Thank you guys, you've cut the gap dramatically. I appreciate that. But now we've got the second hour to raise. So anyway, this is super interesting. The strategy of the deployment of generally autonomous vehicles, autonomous submarines under the ocean, autonomous ships, autonomous planes, ultimately robots, different types of combat robots. This is the future of war. It's not only the future of war, it's really the present war. The Pentagon has talked about the fact that if China tries to attack Taiwan, the United States is ready with drone swarms in the Taiwanese Straits to basically make it impossible for the Chinese to cross the Taiwanese Straits, to create so much havoc and so much chaos in the Straits for the Chinese Navy, using both conventional big ships like aircraft carriers and planes, but also swarms of thousands of drones. One of the big challenges, of course, is that China's investing in these technologies as well, and China's investing in the anti-technology, in the ways to stop these drones from functioning. But one of the most interesting things going on right now is as the United States realizes the need for really advanced technologies and advanced drone technologies of autonomous vehicles and others, the Defense Department has slowly, reluctantly, but is actually moving towards a much more positive attitude towards the private sector, and primarily the venture-backed entrepreneurial community like Silicon Valley, where there is a lot of funding. I'd say Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and others initiated this. God, I forget the name of the other venture capitalist whose name I had a minute ago and slipped my mind. They all initiated this a while back, but Silicon Valley's been investing heavily in recent years in defense technology, in high-tech defense technology. And finally, the Department of Defense seems quite positive regarding capitalizing on this and regarding teaming up with entrepreneur-based ventures, venture-backed companies in order to enhance innovation. At the end of the day, the advantage the United States has over China and over Russia and over, well, I can't even say Iran because Iran's a nothing, but really over China and over Russia, the real advantage the United States has is its freedom. And what that freedom really manifests in is innovation. And what gives me the confidence to say that America could take on any one of these enemies and defeat them is America's ability to innovate quickly, and innovate, as all innovation is, in unexpected ways. And while the government bureaucracy and the Defense Department and the Pentagon moves slowly and is very risk averse and very driven by politics, all kinds of different politics, not just the politics of Democrats, Republicans, but also the politics of pilots versus drones versus aircraft carriers versus who has the budget and the internal politics of these organizations. At the end of the day, the American system provides for the freedom of the American system, provides for innovation that is driven by entrepreneurs, that is driven by venture capital. And there is a lot of defense investing right now going on in Silicon Valley. Now, it is tiny as compared to the amount of money being spent by the Defense Department on big assets, aircraft carriers, F-35 airplanes, the multi-billion dollar or really $1 trillion investments that the Pentagon makes. But there is a growing emphasis and a growing voice and a growing urgency for the Pentagon to be investing in future technologies, in autonomous weapons, in AI. So there was a lot of discussion about this, and while there's a lot of pessimism about how slow the bureaucracy works, how slow it changes, one of the reasons, for example, the Navy had this great project where they actually designed a drone that could fly off of an aircraft carrier and land on an aircraft carrier, which is not easy at all. And there was a lot of skepticism about whether they could get this large drone airplane to actually land on an aircraft carrier. And they managed it. They pulled it off. And this is years ago. They pulled it off. And, this had the potential of replacing many of the manned aircraft on a carrier with drones. And there was a huge backlash. And who was the backlash from? Well, it was from the people who are going to lose their jobs. And people who have a lot of stake in their jobs. So the backlash was from Navy pilots. And if you know anything about Navy pilots, incredibly proud, incredibly confident, they're better than machines. They know they're better than machines. They're not going to be replaced by machines. They're not going to let machines replace them. So these Navy pilots basically lobbied against the drones, and the Navy basically abandoned. its drone program, which is ultimately a disaster, right? Because that is the future. So they might have to, reverse course, and they will at some point. But in spite of the bureaucracy and all of that, there is real thinking, and there is real engagement, and there's real investment. Another thing is it's hard for the military to invest, in a sense, in cheap hardware where you can upgrade the software constantly, so you can improve the skill set of whatever the piece of hardware is going to do. But the hardware is fixed, and the hardware is cheap. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of inertia about buying expensive, over-engineered, it can do F-35. It can do everything. It can do literally everything. But it costs a gazillion. Whereas a cheap little drone, produced in some, back of a garage in Ukraine, is probably more effective in certain things than any F-35 is, even with its stealth capabilities. And imagine if you had stealth drones, which I'm sure the United States has, but imagine if you had stealth drones instead of F-35s on these aircraft carriers, and you had different drones for different purposes, and you had a lot of small drones that could be some of these swarms that come in, and an air defense system can't shoot them all down. I mean, there's so many possibilities here. Changing the thinking at the Pentagon, changing the thinking within the bureaucracy, changing the thinking among generals that have studied a particular way of war, a particular way of fighting, forever, is very, very difficult. It's happening slowly, but slower than we like. The good news is, or one of the pieces of good news is, that China's way behind on almost all these technologies. It's certainly way behind in AI and implementing AI within weapon systems. And it's nowhere close to having the kind of innovation engine that we have in Silicon Valley. All the people out there who constantly condemn Silicon Valley, constantly go after Silicon Valley, constantly think that Silicon Valley is this bastion of leftism and it should be abolished and condemned and everything else. Silicon Valley is our comparative advantage. Geopolitically, it is our comparative advantage. Militarily, it is our comparative advantage. In the future, it's not going to be about sheer manufacturing capacity. You need some of that, no question. You need to build the bombs and so on. But the reality is that in a future war, and in a war soon, not in a very, very distant future, is going to be mostly about technology and innovation, and innovating fast, and innovating on the battlefield. And that's going to come down to Silicon Valley, led companies. Palantir is a Peter Thiel company that's in the defense space, but there are many others. I want to say something about AI that came up, which I thought was really interesting. So you have to remember that AI is dumb. I mean, really dumb. AI can only extrapolate from what it has learned. And the learning is one-to-one. That is, it can't imagine a new situation, not really. So, for example, when we train the LLMs, the large language models, we're training them on language, we're training them on lots of text, lots of writing, so that they integrate is not the right word, but they statistically figure out what goes with what. And they can make some, quote, decisions based on certain probabilistic models. Now, here's the problem with putting AI into war. What do you train it on? Think about how much training any one of these AI models does, on how many cases and how many iterations. But conditions at war are constantly changing. Every war is different. The opponent is constantly going to react in a varied way, particularly knowing they're combating in AI, they will try to confuse it as much as possible by introducing new elements that didn't exist in the past. I mean, one of the things that came out, what I thought was super interesting, is how do you actually train an AI system for warfare, for the uncertainty, the constantly changing, what was it about planning in war? You know, you have to, you know, something about plans being, you have to change them and adapt them immediately. That is, no plan is worth anything once a war actually starts, once combat actually starts. And that is not something AI can adapt to. So I think that the people on the call who are experts basically argued that we're probably 10 to 20 years away from really using, not AI in the back, that they'll use sooner, but in terms of actually using AI on the battlefield and giving autonomous vehicles, autonomous planes, AI to make decisions and choices in battle conditions, we're probably at least 20 years away from that. 10 to 20 years is the number they used. So far off, and they explained why, and it has to do with, a lot of it just has to do with training, the impossibility of training them, because the war is rare, and you have to train them on real life conditions. And you can mimic it, you can pretend, you can do all that, but an AI cannot adapt to something completely new. Not yet. All right. Okay, let's see. I'll just give you a quick update on Israel, and then I think no, actually, I'm going to skip that. I'll leave that for tomorrow. I do have a hard stop at 4 p.m. East Coast time, so I'm going to keep. I've got a bunch of other stories here. I'm going to keep them for tomorrow. I'm sure that some of them will be superseded by more urgent stuff, but I see we've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to try to cover them, and then if we have a little bit of time, I can update you on Israel or something else. I will remind you again, Listener Funded Show can't exist without your contributions, your support. If you're live, you can support the show value for value, trader principle. Don't you want to be a trader? You can do that on the super chat feature on YouTube. You can do it with a sticker. You can do it with a super chat question. You can also do it, of course, on a monthly basis on Patreon, trying to get those Patreon numbers up. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. $5, $10 a month, whatever it happens to be, is greatly appreciated. Of course, if you can do $500 a month, that is, and you get a one-on-one with me every month and all kinds of other perks, so please consider that. And you can also do that on PayPal, on yaronbrookshow.com/membership. Finally, yeah, we have sponsors. I encourage you to check them out. John Bobbin on health and exercise and nutrition. He is a long-time listener to the show, a significant supporter of the show, now a sponsor. He has a Fi Life is his channel on YouTube. Just look John Bobbin, B-A-R-B-A-N. John Bobbin on YouTube. There's a link below. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you can check him out. Just go to, he kind of synthesizes a lot of the material you get from Atiyah and a lot of these other people and presents it in an individualistic framework and how to apply all these things to you, your particular special case, which is really, really important work to be done. So I encourage you to go to his channel and subscribe. The Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of the show right now. They're promoting scholarships for the conference in Brisbane, Australia on December 6th to 8th. I'll be speaking there, and so will Nikos. It will be me and Nikos, the Nikos and Yaron show. It'll be a lot of fun. I hope you come. It's going to be a varied program with the two of us. It'll be over 2 days. The thing that we're promoting right now, we'll be promoting the conference later, but right now what we're promoting is scholarships for the conference. I mentioned this earlier. If you're a student or you know students who live in the East Asia, South Asia, or in Australia and New Zealand, and you would and those students would benefit from coming to the conference and interacting with us, and maybe one day becoming students at the ARU, maybe one day even becoming objectivist intellectuals. They have to have decent English, but other than that, the Institute is offering scholarships, including, in some cases, airfare and hotel. So please consider this. Australia is about the closest the Ayn Rand Institute has ever held a conference to Asia. And it's the furthest we've ever done a conference from the United States and Europe. So please, this is our first. Let's get a lot of scholarship students. Please apply. Again, if you live in Japan or in South Korea or in Taiwan or in China. We're getting a few scholarship applications already from China, Hong Kong, Singapore. Please encourage people to apply. And of course, if you're in Australia, it's a no-brainer. Please apply. You can get information about the scholarship at aynrand.org/start here. And let me just say to those of you who live there, don't just think about yourself. Think about people you know who might be suitable for this. Think about students you know. Think about people interested in objectivism who would love to really dig deep into objectivism. Think about them and encouraging them to apply for the scholarship. aynrand.org/start here. And finally, Alex Epstein, alexepstein.substack.com, the #1 world expert on energy, fossil fuels, and environmentalism. His talking points are brilliant. They basically take the issues of the day in these areas and give you exactly what it looks like. And there's also an Alex AI, which many congressmen and some people in higher office actually use to reference these talking points and Alex's views on different issues, and AI trained on Alex. Pretty cool. All right, let's go to our super chat, and let's start with David with $50 again. Thank you, David. If I bought gold at 1,600 and it's now 2,500, should I sell it now or wait? Do gold buyers pay full price? Who do I sell it to? Well, the same people you bought it from, I assume, right? So there are gold dealers out there, and I'm sure they take a margin, so I'm sure they don't pay you the full price of 2,500. They'll pay you something. Should you sell? I don't give investment advice, and I'm not going to. I would say this. Gold is a great security blanket. It is a great hedge against political uncertainty. It's a great hedge against inflation. But I'd say the primary hedge is against the end of the world. Collapse of civilization, or just the collapse of the dollar, or just things going bad. I think it's good to have gold as part of your investment portfolio. 10-15% of your assets could be in gold. It's a good asset class to have. Again, particularly physical gold, which again you can use if things get really, really bad, if civilization really, really gets in trouble. So I would definitely hold some. It's not a question of when you bought it and what the price is now. It's a question of what the price will be tomorrow. And I don't know what it will be. Again, if we're heading towards a period of greater political instability, if people really believe there's going to be a civil war in the United States, yeah, you should have a lot of your assets in gold. If the war in Ukraine and other wars around the world are only going to intensify, if China invades Taiwan, gold is a good asset to have. Its value will increase. On the other hand, if we're heading towards a couple of decades of incredible stability and economic growth and peace, then gold's not a good asset to have. You would rather have your money in a stock market or something like that. Your call, based on your assessment of where we're heading. All right, David also asks, also for $50, thank you, David. An interesting argument for how arming Ukraine will not cause Russia to escalate When U.S. was fighting in Viet Nam and Korea, both Chinese and Russian weaponry was used against U.S. forces without fear of U.S. escalating. Yeah, but the assumption is that U.S. is civilized and U.S. would never use a nuclear weapon, and that Russia is uncivilized and Russia would. The assumption is that the U.S. is rational and the Russians are not rational. I think those assumptions are true, but the real issue here is that Putin is not suicidal. Putin is not going to use nuclear weapons because he knows he could get wiped out in such a situation. He does not want NATO to come into the war because he knows, even though he will never admit it, that NATO could wipe out the Russian forces within hours or days or weeks, certainly. That the NATO has the firepower and has the technology to crush the Russian army, and any escalation in his behalf that brings NATO into the war is the end of his regime, and that is ultimately the issue at stake. But it's not, well, the U.S. didn't escalate, therefore the Russians won't escalate. I mean, the Russians are very different than the U.S., so I don't know that I would buy into that kind of an argument. Let's see, Bogdan with 50 Canadian dollars, not quite 50 American dollars, but almost. If it turns out that Ayn Rand was wrong about a fundamental philosophical issue, would you admit it? If not, why? If yes, would you still consider yourself an objectivist? If she was wrong about a fundamental philosophical issue, I would admit it. Yes, I would admit it. I mean, I am primarily a truth seeker, only secondarily an objectivist. If yes, would you still consider yourself an objectivist? No. No. Objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand. If Ayn Rand was wrong and I disagreed with her on a fundamental issue, then I would no longer be an adherent to her philosophy. I'd still be an adherent, I think, to the truth, which is what's important to me and what should be important to you, but I wouldn't be an adherent to objectivism, which is her philosophy. So no, I would not consider myself an objectivist if that were the case. So one, if I was convinced that she was wrong on a fundamental philosophical issue, I'd admit it. Two, I would stop calling myself an objectivist at that point. All right, Thomas, is price gouging ever a valid term? Or is it just an emotionally loaded phrase used by demagogues? When gas prices in Florida rise to $10 a gallon during a hurricane, is there something going on beyond supply and demand? No, there's nothing going on beyond supply and demand. And indeed, it's a healthy thing that gas prices go up during a crisis, because basically that allows those who value the gas the most to get it, those who are willing to pay the price to get it. It also provides a massive incentive to bring gas into the disaster area because you get to make a lot of money off of it. So this is a great example where the profit motive is, as it does everywhere, provides great incentives to overcome the difficulties created by, for example, natural disasters and other challenges. Price gouging is an anti-concept. There is no such thing. It is in the imagination of those who who come up with these ideas. When prices go up, in a free market or in a semi-free market, in a market that's mostly driven by supply and demand, it means there's supply and demand. That's it. And in this case, demand is high, supply is low, prices will go up. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Again, those who value the gas, those whose gas is more important, or even if you get to the gas station and you want to just get out of the area, you might buy $10 worth of gas just to get you out of the county, just to get you, and then you'll fill up over there where prices are much cheaper, rather than if the government forces the price to be cheap, then you'll fill up the gas. You'll fill up now by filling it up, you will guarantee that the people behind you don't get any gas. So if you actually raise the price, and by raising the price, everybody only takes a little bit of gas, enough to get them out of the danger zone, then there'll be enough gas for a lot of people. So it just works to achieve what you actually want to achieve. But you know, gouging is just it's just a smear. It's an anti-concept. There is no such thing. It just means a price I don't like. Jeremy, thoughts on Hanania's essay on still wanting the stupid party to win? I haven't read it. I saw it published. I haven't had a chance to read it, so I will read it and I'll give you my thoughts on it. I certainly understand the sentiment, right? Because the stupid party, from a policy perspective, will do less damage to a lot of things, or to some things, than the so-called non-stupid party. I like Hanania's emphasis on the Republican Party being the stupid party, on conservatives being generally stupid, and that supporters of Trump being generally low intelligence, people of low intelligence, that MAGA is generally a low intelligence movement. But let me read the essay and give you comments specifically about the essay. I generally like what Hanania writes, but I also think that he ignores certain things, and in this case, you know. Yeah, let me read the essay before I speculate on stuff I don't know what I'm talking about. Jennifer, now there's no more oak oppression, for they passed a noble law, and the trees are all kept equal by hatchet, axe, and saw. Okay, so there's a song, The Trees by Rush. I'll read it again, this time knowing it's a quote. Now there's no more oak oppression, for they passed a noble law, and the trees are all kept equal by hatchet, axe, and saw. Yeah, I mean, great lyrics again from Rush. You know, basically, you know, applying some of Ayn Rand's ideas. They were obviously influenced significantly. All right, Mary Aline, I read Marva Collins' wonderful book, Schools Like Hers Teach Kids to Think and Be Independent. Kids who think become adults who want better leaders. That's part of why politicians want to control education to remain in power. Absolutely, and it's why, of all the issues out there, the one that I think is most important, and the one the Republicans are the best on a local level, on the state level, is the issue of school choice. Is the issue of particularly if they use education tax credits, education saving accounts, and Republicans should be supported on a local level if they support education saving accounts. If there's a chance that that gets passed, then Republicans should be supported on the local level. At the federal level, they have no impact on these things, so it doesn't make a big difference. And of course, you get other stuff with it, and even on the local level, of course, you get other stuff like anti-abortion with it. But it could be that this education saving accounts is the most important issue out there. I'm curious. I haven't seen studies yet. I'm curious in talking to people in education about how the education saving accounts have changed or are changing the educational landscape in states that have adopted these laws. That is going to be fascinating to watch. I know theoretically how it should play out if these saving accounts are real. The question is, in reality, is it playing out that way? And to what extent are the education saving accounts real or just a mirage? Don, the U.S. national debt is $35 trillion. How is it calculated? What does it mean? How does it affect me? How does the government function with this much debt? What will happen as it continues to grow? Those are big questions. So first, the national debt is calculated pretty easily. It looks at all the loans that the government has taken. That is, all the bonds that it issued to fund its operations. That debt grows every year by the difference between how much the government spends and how much it brings in through tax revenue. That's called the deficit. That deficit has to be financed somehow. It's financed by issuing bonds, by selling bonds to the public, if you will. Now, the public might be different governments around the world, different financial institutions around the world primarily, but but it's selling those bonds, and those bonds constitute the debt. They have to be paid back. So how does it affect you? It affects you. It affects me. It affects me. It affects you, because these debts have to be paid back. At some point, they have to be paid. Right now, the way they're paid back is new debt is issued. And so it's like a pyramid scheme, right? We keep getting new paper. We keep issuing new debts to pay off the old debts. And that keeps increasing because we keep spending more than we bring in. The only way ultimately to pay it off is to raise taxes or to cut spending dramatically. And that, of course, will affect you, and affects you either way, more positively if they cut spending, very positively if they cut spending, very negatively if they increase taxes. But at some point, people will stop buying American debt because they say, wait a minute, you'll never be able to pay all this back. And the only way you might be able to pay it back is if you inflate your currency. And I don't want to hold IOUs, I don't want to hold a bond, I don't want to hold a debt in a currency that's going to be inflated. It's going to be, inflation means the currency loses its value. So at some point, people won't want to buy their debt. At that point, Congress will have to raise taxes or cut spending or do both, probably both. Or, as has often happened in history, inflate like crazy. Every one of those choices affects you. Now, the market knows this. So the market is somewhat anticipating this. And it's anticipating it by keeping inflation relatively high now in anticipation that it will be higher in the future. So all of that impacts you, and it impacts you right now. Also, it impacts you. And again, this is a very short answer. I could go, we could do several shows on this, and if anybody wants to sponsor a show on this, let me know. Happy to do a whole show on this. But think about the fact that when the government spends all this money, it's money you don't get to spend. It's money you don't get to save. It's money you don't get to invest. It's money that is basically consumed by the government instead of being consumed or invested or saved by you. And therefore, it grows the public sector and it shrinks the private sector. And thus, it shrinks the potential for economic growth. And that affects you because the economy is not growing as fast as it should otherwise grow. What will happen if it continues to grow? As I said, at some point, people will say, I don't want this debt. I don't want to buy U.S. government bonds. At that point, interest rates will go through the roof. A lot of the stuff that you take for granted as affordable will become unaffordable. Standard of living in the United States will drop. And the government will have to, again, raise taxes, cut spending, and probably inflate, probably do all of the above. It's really, really, really bad. It's bad news. Again, happy to do a whole show on that. Michael, Western intellectuals in the 1930s were fully committed to communism and egalitarianism. Today, they are only 50% committed. They hold individual freedom and market activity in some regard. Progress? Well, in some regards, yes, but those same intellectuals who were committed to communism in the 1930s are today committed to identitarianism, to intersectionality, to post-colonial bullshit, to egalitarianism. That is, the egalitarianism today is much worse than the communism in the 1930s. In the 1930s, they were Marxists. Today, they are much worse than Marxists. I've done a show on that. So I don't know if that's progress. Now, even then, in the 1930s, take the FDR administration, they understood that they need some market activity, that they need some progress. The woke people at the universities today, they don't want to see, they don't believe in some market progress. They don't see some market activity. That's the Paul Krugmans of the world. But the Paul Krugmans of the world are not the worst of the intellectuals. And there were always Paul Krugmans, even in the 1930s. The real communists were at the universities, just like the real leftist intellectuals at the universities. So no, I don't think we've made any real progress. I think things are worse in terms of the core intellectuals, the intellectual teaching in the departments. Mary Elaine, please explain why Ayn Rand wasn't a minarchist. There's contention in the chat, and I could use some help. Yeah, Ayn Rand was not a minarchist. Indeed, I hate that term. I find the term offensive. She was not for a minimal state, as if it's a quantitative thing. It's how big should it be? Well, it should be small. No, I mean, that's not the principle. She was a principled defender of a limited government. Limited not in size, but in scope. Limited in what it did, not in how much money it spent doing it. Not in how many people it employed, but in what they did. So she was not a minarchist in the way it's being used. Indeed, the whole idea of minarchism is silly. It's minimal state and then no state. No, there's a principle here. And Ayn Rand understood that what a state is based on a principle, the principle of individual rights, on the need to protect the rights of individuals, property rights and other rights, and therefore the establishment of the government of a necessary size and scope to protect the rights of individuals. And I don't know how big that is. I don't know how much such a government spends, how many people it employs. It's smaller than it is today by a lot, but is it a minimal state? No, it's not a minimal state. It's not, okay, just one policeman, that's enough. It's as many policemen as one needs. It's as many judges as one needs. It's as many laws as one needs. It's as big of a military as one needs. But the limiting factor is not size. It's not because as soon as you go to a minimal state, it's asymptotic to zero, which is asymptotic to anarchy. So the anarchists would like us to think about the state as minimal or maximal. We think of the state as doing its proper job, protecting rights, or not. And usually the or not means it's violating rights. So no, Ayn Rand was against minarchism as such. The term should be abolished from use. We should, certainly as objectivists, we shouldn't use it. We should use the term limited government, or we should use the term capitalism. We're capitalists. We believe in a government that is capitalist. Hope, Mary Eileen, that helped. All right. Walz's wedding day was the 5th anniversary of Tiananmen Square massacre, apparently. That's pretty spooky. I'm sure he didn't do that on purpose, but it's still pretty spooky. And then to go on your honeymoon to China when you know your wedding anniversary is on the same day as the massacre in Tiananmen Square, and then go. Maybe he was married before Tiananmen Square. I think he was married before Tiananmen Square. Anyway, spooky anyway. Wyatt, aren't you compelled to believe Kamala can't get her agenda passed and Walz will be a moderate? Because otherwise it would be wrong to hope they win. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that Republicans can take the Senate. I think it's very likely the Republicans get the Senate, probably a small margin, and that they control Kamala. I mean, I've always been for divided government. I've always been for the idea that what do you call it, when they can't get anything across. So the best for liberty, the best for particularly economic liberty, has been a Democratic president and a Republican House or Senate. And that's what I'm hoping for. And I think there's a good chance, again, one of the reasons is that I think there's a really good chance that Republicans take the Senate. They'll probably lose the House, but I think they take the Senate. But look, the issue here is not that I'm hoping Kamala wins. I'm not hoping anybody wins. It's that I realize the risks of Donald Trump winning, particularly if Donald Trump wins and the Republicans get the House and the Senate. I think that's an unmitigated disaster. And I think Donald Trump is just awful. He's awful for the rule of law. He's awful for the Constitution. He's awful for the very nature of freedom in America. Kamala's terrible, but she's terrible still within the conventional sense of terrible. Donald Trump is a game changer. And there's every reason, given his behavior in 2020, that he will be even worse this time around than he was the first 4 years, where he already destroyed the Republican Party. And we see that today. All right, so anyway, so I'm not hoping Kamala wins. I'm hoping Donald Trump loses, and I'm hoping that Republicans win the Senate. That's what I hope. Andrew, is it cynical to think that the opposition on the left to Kamala's price controls is merely in that it's too explicit? In other words, the left wants control over business, but not to be too obvious. I think definitely significant elements on the left want that control of business, and they don't want to be too obvious. There's no question about that. Now, there's a lot of opposition to her price controls that comes from people who just know economics. And there is a significant number of people on the center left who just, know enough economics to know what a disaster price controls will be. And they're not motivated by nihilism. They're not motivated by egalitarianism. They're just left of center people, old style leftist liberals. And they're not for, burning it all to the ground. They're not with the protesters outside the convention. They're mainstream. And, these mainstream leftists understand, some of them understand, that the economics of price controls are a unmitigated disaster, and they will, I think they want to avoid that. They don't want a disaster, and they know that their political party will be blamed for it, so they don't want to take that on. Christoph, do you recommend investing in diversified index funds or using a service like Nutmeg by JP Morgan Chase who invest for you? Amazing show, thank you. I recommend investing in diversified index funds. If somebody else is doing the investing for you, then they're going to charge you a fee, and it's not clear that they add enough value to justify the fee. So I would go with index funds, which are the cheapest and easiest way to invest. I would, invest in growth, value stocks, and I would invest in basically a very well diversified portfolio tilted towards value rather than growth. That's the best I can do. Apollo Zeus, have you read Tai-Pan, the novel in 1966 written by James Clavell? If so, your thoughts. I haven't read it, but interested. I don't remember if I read it or not. I don't think I did, but I like James Clavell. So everything that I did have read of James Clavell, which now I can't remember because I read them all in the 1980s. Yeah, in my 20s, maybe even in the 1970s. So it's a vague memory. So I might have read Tai-Pan. I'm not sure, but I just don't remember. So I'm sorry. It's been too long. My wife tells me I've definitely read Tai-Pan. Tai-Pan maybe is the one in Hong Kong? Anyway, I can't remember. So that's the problem. It's a long time ago since I read them. Apollo Zeus, your thoughts on Howard Hughes? Yeah, I mean, it's a long question. I mean, Howard Hughes was obviously brilliant and incredibly entrepreneurial and a great businessman. He built a fortune. He invested in breakthrough industries, whether it was in oil and ultimately in airlines and in lots of other things. But he was also crazy. I don't know exactly. I don't know if he was schizophrenic or exactly what the diagnosis would be, but he was clearly crazy. And landed up dying in a hotel suite in Las Vegas, one of the richest men in the world, but with nothing, right? But he was incredibly innovative and incredibly strong-willed, and his testimony in front of Congress after they accused him of making money off of the war is fantastic. There's video of it on YouTube. You can find it, Howard Hughes in front of Congress. And in his sane moments, he was exceptional and one of the great businessmen in American history. Sadly, as he got older, he was less and less sane. It's sad, really, mostly sad. There's a good movie about Howard Hughes that I would recommend. It was made, a decade, 15 years ago. Paula says, addendum to Tai-Pan, question your knowledge of the Opium Wars. It's limited. I certainly am no expert on 19th century history in the Pacific region. Clearly, the British used opium. I mean, the Chinese liked opium. When opium was introduced into China, they embraced it, and then the British, understanding that that could give them an advantage, political, geopolitical advantage, used that in order to basically take control over China and really defeat China militarily, but also take control of it, and so again, I don't know all the details, but it basically the Opium Wars was a way for the British to control the Chinese. And sadly, opium was heavily consumed by the Chinese. And says, is air traffic control a valid regulation? No, I mean, it's not. There's absolutely no reason a market cannot provide the service of an air traffic control by providing the right kind of liability to the company that runs the air traffic control. You provide the right kind of incentives. You'd have to think structurally how to do it, but it wouldn't be that hard. You'd have to think about the structure of liability laws that applies, and who owned the air traffic control. Would it be some of the airlines? Would it be insurance companies? That would be a good one, insurance companies owning it. But no, there's no reason to believe that there's no reason to exclude air traffic control as the one industry that the government has to run. It would absolutely be private enterprise free of regulation, and not free of laws that restrict the ability to do abusive things or to do what do you call it, to be so aggressive as to clearly place people at risk. So, but I think all of that is captured by liability law, and the concept of gross negligence, and the ability to prevent somebody from engaging in activity that is grossly negligent, and using the law in order to do that. You don't have to have specific regulations for that. There's nothing unique about air traffic control other than the risks involved, but the risks involved in many other things. What if a single pilot doesn't want to participate? Well, then he gets fired. I mean, you're dealing with American Airlines or Delta or United. I mean, the coordination is best done by the private sector. The private sector does coordination much better than the government does, than regulations do. Regulations distort incentives and prevent coordination. The best coordination is under freedom. All right, we have 7 minutes and a few questions. Michael asks, why are Christians so anti-emotion? Muslims and Jews aren't like that. I don't think any of that is true. I don't know that Christians are anti-emotions. Certainly the Protestants, the evangelicals are very pro-emotions. They're pro certain types of emotions, emotions of mystical revelation, emotions associated with humility, emotions, all kinds. It's the kind of emotions, and I don't know that you can categorically define Muslims and Jews as being pro-emotions in some way. I don't think that's true at all, at all. Michael says, does polite society view transactions as crass and detestable? I think there's a big part of society that views, and has viewed in the past, trade, transaction, being a merchant, making money off of trade, as detestable and beneath them and low. And that manifests in the regulation of business. It manifests in a lot of different ways. But yes. Michael also asks, would the best case scenario be Kamala wins, the Republican control the House and Senate? Yes, I think that's the best scenario. Do you think Kamala can actually get anything done? She seems like she's on anti-anxiety medications. Yeah, no, she can definitely get stuff done. She'll have people around her. She'll delegate. These bureaucracies and these political machines are quite powerful, and there will be a lot of delegation, and there'll be stuff. I mean, look at Biden. He's getting a lot done, even though he's senile, basically, because there are people around him that get stuff done. Lucinda says, hi, Yaron. Finished Blackadder a couple of days ago, including Blackadder's Christmas Carol. Currently a fourth through my rewatch of Blackadder. I'm glad you're enjoying it. That is terrific. Hoping you're having a lot of laughs. Raul, how would you define Putin politically? I believe he is a fascist, not in a classical sense, but nevertheless economically. Yes, definitely an economic fascist. He's a fascist also in his own authoritarian tendencies, in the oligarchy that he creates around him. But yeah, I'd say the closest thing for Putin is a fascist, but just he's an authoritarian thug who controls the economy through his relationships with other thugs that he has surrounded himself with. But he's very close to fascist socially too. I mean, he doesn't quite throw gays out of windows, but you don't want to be gay in Russia, and there are laws against it, and you can get into legal trouble. And so there are all kinds of social ways in which he's a fascist as well. Okay, final question. Shazbat, we don't have to worry about AI going haywire as long as William Shatner is around. He was neutralizing bad AIs all the time on Star Trek. Exactly. I mean, William Shatner's still alive, but he's not going to be alive for very long, unless maybe he'll live forever. But yes, he has special powers, so we're safe. Thank you, Shazbat. All right, guys. I'm sorry I have to cut it short again, but I do have a meeting that starts in 4 minutes. I will see you all tomorrow, same time. This will be the time that the show's while I'm here. 8 p.m. my time, 2 p.m. East Coast time. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.